They only call me when things go wrong. Not the kind of wrong where they send a cleanup crew, silence a few witnesses, and pretend nothing happened. No, I mean the kind of wrong that leaves a town abandoned overnight. The kind that makes soldiers vanish without a trace. The kind of wrong that doesn't stay dead. The file landed in my lap just past midnight, slid across a diner table by a man I hadn't seen in years. He wore a gray suit, crisp and forgettable, the kind of outfit designed to blend in. The only thing that stood out was his eyes, cold, calculating, empty. "Just you this time, Kane," he said, his voice as dry as old paper. I flipped open the file. A single sheet of paper. No mission details, no classified reports, just an address. Black Ridge, West Virginia. I frowned. No brief? No intel? Just a location. You don't need anything else. The man adjusted his tie. "You find it. You kill it. That's what you do, right?" I stared at him, waiting for more. He didn't blink. "Good luck," he said, sliding out of the booth and vanishing into the night. I took a slow breath and glanced down at the paper again. Just an address. But something in my gut told me this one was different. I finished my coffee, paid the bill, and walked outside into the cold. The neon flicker of the diner's sign buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly red glow. The street was quiet, but I could feel something watching. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was just the job getting to me after all these years. Or maybe it was the thing waiting for me in Black Ridge. I got in my car, turned the key, and drove toward whatever nightmare they had waiting. I arrived in Black Ridge just before dusk, a town that wasn't even on most maps, buried deep in the Appalachian wilderness. It had the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, not peaceful, but empty, like the earth itself had swallowed up every living thing. The moment I stepped out of my truck, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick with the scent of iron, heavy and unmistakable. Blood. I kept my rifle close as I walked through the town's single stretch of road. The buildings were old, some half-collapsed, others untouched. It was as if disaster had struck selectively, hitting certain places with violent force while leaving others eerily intact. The gas station at the end of the street had its front windows shattered. A pickup truck sat at the pump, its door wide open. The keys dangled in the ignition, swinging slightly, as if someone had just been there. But there was no one. I stepped closer, my boots crunching over glass. Dried blood streaked the driver's seat. A lot of it, more than someone could lose and still walk away. Yet, there was no body, no drag marks, just nothing. A faint breeze carried the smell of something rotten. I turned toward the diner across the street. Its neon sign buzzed weakly, barely clinging to life. Inside, the booths were empty, meals left half-eaten. A plate of eggs sat on a table near the window. A thick layer of dust settled over the yolks. Someone had left in a hurry, long enough ago for the dust to settle, but not long enough for the power to die. I pushed open the door, the bell above it letting out a weak, broken chime. My steps were slow, careful. The counter had been overturned, a register smashed open, but there were no signs of a struggle. No footprints in the dust. Just more blood, smeared across the floor in long, desperate streaks. Then I heard it, a wet, dragging sound from the back room. I froze, listening. The sound came again, something shifting, heavy like flesh against linoleum. My pulse quickened, my grip tightened on my rifle. I moved toward the kitchen door, careful not to make a sound. The smell hit me first, thick, putrid, something between rotting meat and burnt hair. My stomach turned, but I kept moving. I pushed the door open with the barrel of my rifle. The room was dark, save for the weak flicker of a failing light. The metal counters were streaked with blackened blood. A freezer door stood ajar. Something slumped against it. It was a man, or at least, what was left of him. His chest had been torn open, ribs cracked outward as if something had burst from inside him. His face was frozen in a twisted expression of agony, his mouth open wide in a silent scream. His hands were clenched into fists, fingernails broken and bloody. He had fought something, and lost. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. My instinct screamed at me to get out, to leave this place behind. But I needed answers. That's when I saw the camera. A small security setup sat in the corner, the screen still displaying grainy footage. The timestamp showed it had recorded just 2 nights ago. I stepped closer and pressed play. The screen flickered. A man stood in the diner, wearing a sheriff's uniform. He looked nervous, pacing. Then, the front door swung open, but no one stepped inside. The sheriff reached for his gun. His mouth moved, like he was shouting something. Then, suddenly he was gone. No struggle. No attack. Just gone. One frame he was there, the next he wasn't. Like something had erased him from existence. My hands tightened around the edge of the counter. The footage continued, but all that remained was an empty diner. And then, in the final seconds, the camera caught something. Just a flicker, a shadow moving impossibly fast. A shape, a figure. And for the briefest moment before the feed cut out, I saw a pair of eyes staring directly into the camera. They weren't human. My stomach turned to ice. I had been sent here to hunt something. But now, standing in the middle of this silent, blood-soaked town, I realized the truth. I wasn't the hunter. I was the prey. I crouched behind the rusted remains of an old pickup truck, my fingers tightening around the grip of my pistol. The silence of the abandoned town pressed in on me, thick and unnatural. A few minutes ago, I had made the mistake of contacting Division 13. Now, I was about to pay for it. The call had been short. Target is classified. Stand down and await further orders, the cold voice on the other end had instructed. I knew that tone. It wasn't a suggestion. So I asked the question that had been burning in my gut since I got here. Who am I really hunting? Silence. Then a slight pause, as if the handler was deciding whether I was worth the truth. Finally, the reply came, flat and emotionless. New orders, Kane. You're now designated a rogue asset. Termination authorized. Then the line cut dead. My stomach dropped. They weren't just covering something up. They were tying up loose ends. And I was one of them. Now, crouched behind the truck, I listened carefully. The wind rustled through broken windows, carrying the faint creak of a swinging street sign. Somewhere in the distance, a metal can clattered against the pavement. But there was something else. Something quieter. Footsteps. They were here. I took a slow breath and counted. Division 13 wouldn't send a full strike team. Not yet. They'd send a small squad, 3, maybe 4 men, to clean up the mess. Silent. Efficient. Ghosts with guns. A shadow moved near the general store across the street. Another one slipped between the ruins of a gas station. They were spreading out, flanking me. Standard containment tactics. I needed to move. I gritted my teeth, steadied my breathing, and counted down in my head. 3. A glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. 2. The faint click of a rifle being raised. 1. I rolled out from cover, squeezing the trigger twice. The first shot hit the closest operative in the chest. His body armor absorbed most of it, but the impact knocked him back. The second shot slammed into his knee, and he dropped like a stone. The silence shattered. Gunfire erupted, kicking up dust and shattered glass as I sprinted toward the alley behind the hardware store. Bullets tore through the air, biting into the brick wall beside me. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and ducked behind a stack of rotting wooden pallets. A voice crackled through my earpiece, patched through from a scrambled frequency. Kane, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I knew that voice. Agent Brooks, you were one of us, he continued. We gave you a way out, and you just couldn't leave it alone. You should have stayed in the dark. I scanned the alley, my mind racing. They had the numbers. They had the gear. If I stayed pinned down, I was dead. You sent me in blind. I called back, keeping my voice steady. You didn't think I'd start asking questions? A pause. Then, almost reluctantly, it's not personal, Kane. Orders are orders. I smirked bitterly. That's what they always said. I grabbed an old glass bottle from the ground, tossed it over a dumpster, and fired a shot the second it shattered. The gunfire that followed told me they had taken the bait. I sprinted toward the opposite end of the alley, cutting through a back door into a half-collapsed diner. The place smelled like mildew and rotting upholstery. The black and white tiles were cracked, and faded menus still clung to the walls. I kept low, weaving through overturned tables. Outside, heavy boots crunched against the gravel. They were close. Too close. I checked my ammo. 2 shots left in the mag. A full clip in my belt. I had to make them count. I took a slow breath, steadied my grip, and prepared for the next move. If they wanted to erase me, they'd have to work for it. The name on the file made my stomach drop. Lucas Kane. I read it again, hoping I was wrong. But there it was, typed in black ink, cold and official. My younger brother's name stamped on a classified Division 13 document, hidden beneath layers of redacted text. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening around the worn folder as my mind raced. Lucas had been declared killed in action, 2 years ago during a botched retrieval mission. I had been there. I had seen the fire, the wreckage, the blood. I had blamed myself for not being able to save him. But now, staring at this file, a different reality sank in. They had lied. I sat in the dim glow of my hideout, a rundown safe house buried deep in the Appalachian wilderness. The room smelled of dust and gun oil, the walls lined with maps, weapons, and stolen intel from Division 13. A lantern flickered beside me, casting long shadows as I flipped through the pages. Lucas wasn't just dead. He had been taken. The report was vague, full of half-truths and omissions. It described a failed containment operation in an underground facility, Site Echo 7. It mentioned an anomaly breaching containment, an altered subject deemed too unstable to recover. And at the bottom, a single line chilled me to the core. Subject successfully relocated to Project Zero. I felt the air leave my lungs. Project Zero, the same code name used for the entity I was now hunting. I rubbed a hand over my face, my fingers trembling slightly. This wasn't possible. It didn't make sense. Lucas had been a soldier, not some experiment. I had watched the facility burn to the ground. I had seen his body, hadn't I? A memory surfaced, uninvited. The mission, the night everything went wrong. We had been deployed to recover a lost research team from Echo 7, a classified Division 13 lab, hidden deep in an abandoned coal mine. The op was supposed to be routine, go in, locate survivors, extract. Standard Black Ops procedure. But nothing about that night had been standard. The moment we breached the entrance, something felt wrong. The air was thick, stale, carrying a faint metallic scent that set my teeth on edge. Our boots crunched over shattered glass and bullet casings. The power was out, emergency lights pulsing red along the walls. Then we found the bodies, or what was left of them. They had been torn apart, ripped open in ways that no human weapon could accomplish. Deep gashes through reinforced body armor, organs missing, bones snapped like twigs. And the worst part? The expressions. Frozen in terror, eyes wide, mouths twisted mid-scream. Something had hunted them. Lucas was ahead of me, rifle up, scanning the dark corridors. He was always the brave one, the reckless one, the one who laughed in the face of danger while I played it safe. "This place is cursed," he had muttered, sweeping his flashlight over the blood-stained walls. "We shouldn't be here." For once, I agreed. Then we heard it, a sound that still haunted my nights, a low, guttural clicking. Not human, not animal, something else. It echoed from the depths of the facility, growing closer. We barely had time to react before it came. The thing moved too fast. A blur of shifting shadows and gleaming eyes. Claws like knives. Teeth too many to count. It hit our team like a storm, cutting through soldiers before they could scream. Lucas and I had fought. We had emptied entire magazines into it, but the bullets barely slowed it down. The last thing I remembered was Lucas shoving me toward the exit just as the creature lunged. I had called his name. I had tried to reach him. But the doors sealed between us, and the last thing I saw was his silhouette vanishing into the dark. I had told myself he died that night, that no one could survive against that thing. But the file in my hands told a different story. Lucas hadn't died. He had been taken, changed, turned into something else. A cold sweat prickled my skin. My pulse pounded in my ears. I felt like I was suffocating. I flipped to the last page of the file, and my breath caught. A blurry security photo, distorted from static interference, showed a figure standing in a dark hallway. Tall, gaunt, shadowed. Its eyes glowed faintly. The timestamp read 3 days ago. And the subject ID? Project Zero. I shut the file, my hands shaking. The truth was clear now. I wasn't hunting a monster. I was hunting my brother. I drove for hours, following the trail of destruction, that only I seemed to notice. The official reports called it an isolated incident, a gas leak, a chemical spill, anything but the truth. But I had seen the bodies, or rather, what was left of them, torn apart like something had been playing with its food. The deeper I went into the mountains, the quieter the world became. The roads turned to dirt, and the signal on my radio faded into static. It wasn't just the isolation that unsettled me. It was the stillness. No birds, no wind. Even my own breathing felt too loud. I found the abandoned military site just before midnight. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the entrance, its warning signs faded with age. Restricted area. U.S. government property. No trespassing. A lie like everything else they told the public. No one had set foot here in years, except for whatever I was hunting. The gate was already open. I stepped out of my truck, my boots crunching against the gravel, and checked my weapons. A silenced pistol at my hip, a combat knife strapped to my leg, and an old M4 slung across my back. Standard tools for a job like this. But I knew they wouldn't be enough. Not against what I was dealing with. The entrance led to a cluster of low buildings, their windows shattered, roofs sagging. The place had been stripped clean. No vehicles, no supplies, just empty structures rotting in the cold air. If there had been guards here once, they were long gone, either killed or smart enough to run. I moved cautiously, scanning every shadow, every doorway. The ground was littered with old shell casings, and deep claw marks ran along the concrete walls. Whatever had been kept here hadn't escaped easily. Then I found the hatch. It was set into the ground, a thick steel door with a faded emblem. Division 13, Research Facility 042. My stomach tightened. They had buried this place for a reason. But if Subject Zero had come here, then this was where I needed to be. I gripped the handle and pulled. The hatch groaned, rusted hinges screaming in protest, and a deep, black hole yawned open beneath me. A metal ladder led into the darkness, the air below thick and stale. I hesitated, not because I was afraid fear had stopped being useful a long time ago, but because once I went down there, I knew I wouldn't come back the same. I climbed down anyway. The descent was slow. Each rung of the ladder was ice cold, and the air smelled of damp metal and something else, something rotten. My boots hit solid ground, and I flicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, revealing a narrow corridor lined with thick pipes. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming stagnant puddles on the cracked floor. I moved forward, keeping my steps light, my pulse steady, my breathing controlled. The deeper I went, the more the walls changed. At first, they were concrete, reinforced and sterile. But as I passed deeper into the facility, the structure became wrong. Claw marks. Deep, jagged slashes along the walls. And then the writing. It was smeared in something dark, something that had dried a long time ago. The words were frantic, overlapping in uneven strokes, written by hands that had been shaking. God forgive me. It sees me. Not Lucas anymore. I stopped. My grip tightened on my pistol. Footsteps. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Something was moving ahead. I followed, my flashlight flickering as if the air itself resisted the light. The corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with rusted equipment and shattered monitors. Old containment pods lined the walls, their glass cracked and smeared with something thick. Some were empty, others still held remains. A metal desk sat in the center of the room, its surface covered in old reports. Most were too damaged to read, but one caught my eye. A personnel file, half-burned. My fingers trembled as I turned it over. The name was still legible. Lucas Kane. My throat tightened. I barely had time to process it before the temperature in the room dropped. The flashlight flickered again. Then the radio on my belt crackled to life, even though I hadn't touched it. And a voice, warped, distorted, but familiar, whispered through the static. Elias, you should have stayed away. Then the lights died completely. The air was thick with the scent of decay as I stepped deeper into the underground facility. My boots echoed against the metal floor, the only sound in the silence. I could feel the weight of my breath, heavy and uneven, like the whole place was pressing in on me. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I was certain I wasn't ready for it. The hallways were dimly lit, the lights flickering like they were about to give out at any moment. The walls seemed to pulse, the faint hum of the place alive with an energy that made my skin crawl. I reached the door at the end of the corridor, a massive steel thing, cold to the touch. I didn't bother knocking. I just pushed it open. What I saw inside stopped me in my tracks. He was there. Lucas. But not Lucas. It was a creature, twisted, disfigured, and wrong. His body was stretched in unnatural ways, like it was being pulled by invisible strings. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and veins crawled beneath it, black and thick. His eyes, those weren't Lucas' eyes. They were wider, too far apart, and glowed with an eerie yellow hue. His mouth, when it opened, stretched too wide. Too much. A grin that wasn't a grin, but a thing of nightmare. He turned his head slowly toward me. I froze, my pulse hammering in my chest. "Elias," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel being ground underfoot. But it was his voice, I knew that much. The rasp in it, the cadence, the familiar lilt. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. "I thought you were dead," I said, stepping forward cautiously. The words came out before I could stop them. My brother, the kid I used to play catch with, the guy I thought I had buried in that mission, was standing in front of me. Alive, but not alive. Not completely. He cocked his head to the side, his eyes narrowing in something like recognition. Something human, deep down, fighting against the monstrosity that wore his body. He rasped. "I was dead, until they found me." The words hung in the air like a cold draft. I couldn't bring myself to move closer. Part of me wanted to rush to him, to shake him awake, to pull my brother back from whatever hell he'd been dragged into. But another part of me knew better. This thing wasn't Lucas. Not entirely. I started swallowing hard. "They turned you into this." He laughed, a low, rasping sound that sent chills through my spine. "No, not they. I became this. Because I had no choice." I could barely breathe as I stepped forward. The closer I got, the more I saw. His bones weren't right, his muscles strained against his skin, and every movement he made seemed to take far too long. Like something was pulling at him from the inside. "Elias, you don't understand," he said, his voice shifting. It was no longer his voice, or not just his voice. It was something else, something darker. They didn't just experiment on me. They opened something else. It's inside me now. It's always inside me. I shook my head. "No, you're still in there. I know you are." I'm still here," he interrupted, his voice now a hiss. "But I'm not only here. It's changing me. It's changing all of us." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that beneath all the twisted skin and eyes that weren't his, Lucas was still there. But when he looked at me, when he spoke, all I saw was that thing. The thing inside him. The thing that had consumed him. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the gun in my holster. "I can stop this," I said, more to myself than to him. "I have to stop it." He grinned again, the smile wide and horrifying. "You can't stop it, Elias." "I can't stop it. No one can. It's already begun." The words hit me like a slap, a gut punch. The air around me seemed to tighten. Something was wrong. So wrong. He stepped closer to me then. My heart skipped a beat. I took a step back, the hairs on my neck standing on end. "You should have never come here, Elias," he said softly, his voice suddenly calm, almost too calm. "You were the last piece of this. You've been chosen." I didn't have time to react before the ground shook, a low rumble under my feet. I could hear the clattering of boots, the echoes of shouting from somewhere deeper in the facility. "Division 13, I muttered under my breath, knowing what that meant. They were coming. Lucas, no, Subject 0, turned his head toward the sound, his yellow eyes glinting in the dim light. Then, with an unnatural speed, he snapped back to me. "They're not coming for you, Elias. They're coming for me." I didn't have time to think. The door slammed open behind me, and I spun around to see the government's Black Ops squad storming in, weapons raised, their faces masked. "Get down," one of them shouted. I barely had time to draw my weapon before everything went to hell. The facility erupted into chaos, gunfire echoing through the hallways. But all I could hear was the twisted laughter that came from Lucas, his voice now fully gone, replaced by the dark thing inside him. In the midst of it all, I couldn't help but wonder. Could I still save him? Could I save what was left of my brother? Or had I already lost him forever? And what if I was too late? The thing inside him was already consuming him. And maybe, just maybe, it was starting to consume me too. I hadn't realized how far I'd descended into the labyrinth until I was already at the bottom. The flickering fluorescent lights above me barely lit the room, casting eerie shadows on the cracked concrete walls. The air smelled of stale metal and something unnatural. I crouched by the wall, my heart hammering in my chest, but not from fear. No, I'd learned to live with fear long ago. This was different. This was something deeper, something gnawing at the edge of my mind. I heard it before I saw it. A whisper, so faint it almost didn't register. "You're too late," it said. I froze, the hairs on my neck standing up. My breath caught. The voice, was it Lucas? I stood up, turning slowly. My hand was on the gun at my waist, but I didn't draw it. Not yet. And there, at the far end of the lab, was him, or what was left of him. Lucas. No, it wasn't him. Not exactly. His face was warped, his features stretched and twisted like they were trying to hold on to some semblance of humanity, but failing. His skin shimmered, the veins beneath pulsing a sickly greenish hue. His eyes were the worst part. Gone was the familiar spark of life, replaced by something hollow, yet intelligent. I couldn't help but take a step forward. His eyes fixed on me, locking with mine, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "You're not supposed to be here, Elias," he said. His voice sounded cracked, like a mixture of the brother I knew and something far older, more sinister. I stepped closer, my legs shaking, but I refused to back down. "What did they do to you?" Lucas, no, Subject Zero, as the files had called him, tilted his head, a sickeningly knowing smile creeping across his face. "They didn't do this to me, Elias. They did this to us." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't flinch. "What are you talking about? You're still my brother." His laugh was hollow. No, I'm not. You should have realized it by now. The government's been using people like me, people like you, for their twisted experiments. They think they can control what they don't understand. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "They told me you were dead, Lucas. They said." "They lied, Elias," he interrupted, the words dripping with venom. "And you're part of the lie." I stepped back, confusion spiraling in my head. "What do you mean?" Lucas' smile grew wider, and for a moment, I saw the faintest glimmer of my brother. Then it was gone, replaced by something colder, something other. "I wasn't the first," he said, his voice now almost a whisper. "I wasn't the first to die, Elias. I was the first to survive, and they're still hunting what's left of us." I narrowed my eyes. "What's left of us? What do you mean, us?" "Division 13, he spat, like the name itself tasted foul. "They've been experimenting on people for years, Elias, using us as lab rats for some sick, twisted agenda." He stepped forward slowly, his footsteps soundless. "The monsters you're hunting? They're all products of Division 13. But they need more, Elias. They need you." The words struck me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? I'm just a soldier. A tool. I never." "You did," he said, his voice suddenly full of an eerie calm. "You were part of it all along. You were always meant to be. That's why they sent you. Not to stop me, but to bring me out." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind. No, that doesn't make sense. Why would they?" "They knew," he interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "They knew what happened to you in your last mission. The exposure, the way you felt, the way your mind changed." I froze. He was talking about the mission, the one that had gone so wrong. The one that had left me marked, left me with memories I couldn't explain. The nightmares, the whispers, the dark corners of my mind I couldn't reach. "They wanted to see how far you'd go," Lucas continued. "How much of their poison could seep into you before you became one of them. And when you couldn't finish your job, they sent me. They sent me to find you, to finish what you couldn't." I felt the weight of his words pressing down on me, my chest tightening. What are you becoming?" He smiled again, but this time it was full of something far more sinister. "I'm becoming something else. something they can't control. But you, Elias, you're the last piece of the puzzle, the one they can't quite break. Not yet, but they will. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively pulled the gun from my holster. My fingers felt numb around the trigger. And you? You're just a part of their experiment. A test subject, he hissed. The government's been planning this for years, Elias. Creating something far worse than either of us. And they won't stop until they have you too. I raised the gun, but my hand was shaking so violently that I could barely hold it steady. My mind was spinning. Everything felt like it was unraveling. Lucas, no, Subject Zero, wasn't just a monster. He was a piece of a larger machine. A machine I'd unknowingly helped create. And if I didn't stop it now, I might become its next victim. But I didn't have the answers. I didn't know how to stop any of this. I had no idea what to do next. And then, before I could make another move, the sound of boots clanging on metal echoed from the far end of the hallway. Division 13. They were here, and they weren't coming to save me. They were coming to end me. I could hear the soldiers coming. The faint echo of boots on concrete reverberated down the narrow, darkened hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Division 13 was here, and they weren't going to stop until they had wiped me, and Lucas, off the map. My brother, or what was left of him, stood across the room, his eyes glowing with a strange, sickly light. His body was twisted, a grotesque fusion of human and something far worse. But I still saw flashes of the Lucas I once knew. He was still in there somewhere. Stay back, I told him, my voice hoarse. My hand tightened around the gun in my grip. It felt cold, heavy, useless. No matter how many times I'd used it, it never seemed enough. We don't have much time. Lucas blinked, or rather, the thing that had once been Lucas blinked. It tilted its head like it was trying to make sense of my words. Or perhaps it was considering whether to eat me alive or help me. The expression on his face was a mix of confusion and a haunting kind of malice. Something primal, something old, was fighting for control within him. The air felt thick, as if something in the room was pressing down on me, squeezing the breath from my chest. The walls seemed to close in. I could hear the distant hum of the self-destruct countdown. Only a few minutes left, but in a place like this, minutes felt like hours. And every second was a gamble. Suddenly, the doors at the far end of the room exploded inward, a massive crash that sent debris scattering across the floor. Black-clad soldiers, their faces obscured by helmets and masks, poured into the room like a swarm of insects. The flashlights from their guns cut through the darkness, illuminating the chaos. Clear the area. Take them both down, a voice barked from behind the soldiers. I didn't think. I reacted. I dove behind a metal crate, slamming against the cold surface as bullets whizzed past. The sound of gunfire was deafening, but it wasn't the sound that terrified me. It was the realization that I was caught in the middle of a battle between two forces I couldn't control. I was being hunted, but so was Lucas. And worse, I didn't know which side I was on anymore. The soldiers moved with precision. They were professionals, trained to eliminate any threat. But how could they take down something that was no longer human? Lucas stood there, unmoving for a moment, as the first few shots hit him. The bullets didn't penetrate. They ricocheted off his skin, like hitting solid rock. Get him down, a soldier shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Lucas's head snapped to the side. His eyes locked onto one of the soldiers, and for a split second, there was something in his gaze, something that felt human. Then, before I could even blink, his arm shot out, faster than any man could move, and the soldier was lifted off his feet like a rag doll. He slammed into the ceiling with a sickening thud, leaving a trail of blood where his body had scraped the walls. The others hesitated, but only for a second. One by one, they opened fire. I had to move. I couldn't let them kill him. Not yet. Not like this. But I knew that every second I wasted trying to save him brought us both closer to our end. I ducked from behind the crate and fired a few shots in their direction, aiming to give myself enough time to move closer to Lucas. My hand shook. I couldn't focus. There was too much noise, too much chaos. Every shot I fired felt like a wasted opportunity to get through to him. Lucas, I shouted, my voice cracking. Please fight it. His head tilted again, his mouth twisting into something like a grin. But it wasn't his grin. It was the grin of something else entirely. A thing born of flesh and nightmares. I can't fight it. His voice was barely a whisper, distorted and guttural, like 1,000 voices had blended into one. The words scraped against my soul, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. The soldiers were closing in, forcing me toward the far corner of the room. I was running out of time. I had no plan, no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that I couldn't let them kill Lucas, not while there was still a small chance, that I could get through to him. I took cover behind a steel pillar, watching as Lucas tore through the soldiers. His movements were brutal, instinctive. He was no longer my brother. He was a monster, a weapon of destruction. But somewhere in that monstrous form, there was still a flicker of Lucas. I saw it in the way he hesitated before killing the last soldier, like he was holding himself back, like he was trying to remember something, trying to hold on to his humanity. "Lucas, stop!" I shouted again, stepping out from behind the pillar. The gunfire had died down, and I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence. But there was no response, not from Lucas. Instead, I saw the soldiers regrouping, loading their weapons, preparing to unleash everything they had left. I realized then that I was on my own. I had failed to stop them. I had failed Lucas. And Division 13 wasn't just going to kill him. They were going to wipe me off the map, too. My gun clicked empty, and that's when I knew. There was no way out. Then, through the crackling of the radios, through the screams of the dying soldiers, a voice came through the static. It was familiar, cold. "Elias, you were never meant to walk away from this. Neither of you will." I didn't have to look up to know who was speaking. It was my handler, and the realization hit me like a slap in the face. Division 13 had planned for this all along. The monster they'd turned Lucas into wasn't just a failed experiment. It was the end game, and I was the pawn. Now, it was just a matter of who would make it out alive. The flames flickered in the distance, the last remnants of the facility collapsing around us, a slow and inevitable death for everything inside. My heart pounded against my chest, the sound so loud I could barely hear anything else. I looked at Lucas, or what was left of him, and swallowed the lump in my throat. He stood in front of me, but not as the brother I once knew. His body was twisted, half human, half monster. Dark veins pulsed under his skin, glowing faintly in the dim light. And his eyes, those eyes, were no longer the same. They were wide, wild, and terrifying. But there was something in them that almost felt human. I wanted to believe that my brother was still in there, fighting against whatever this thing was that had consumed him. He tilted his head, like a curious animal, watching me with something close to recognition. But then that flicker of humanity was gone. The creature took over, and its voice, his voice, changed. "You should have killed me, Elias. Now it's too late." His voice was deep and distorted, like 1,000 whispers layered on top of each other. I had been here before. I had faced monsters, real ones that tore through people and left nothing but shredded bodies behind. But this was different. This was my brother, and I didn't know what to do. The building groaned above us, the walls buckling, as if the earth itself was tired of carrying this nightmare. The ticking sound of the self-destruct countdown was all I could hear now, every second dragging by slower than the last. "Lucas," I choked on the name. It didn't feel right. My brother was gone. Or maybe not. Maybe he was still buried in there somewhere, fighting for control. "I'm still here, Elias," he said, his voice cracking slightly as the creature pushed him to the edge of losing all control. "But I won't be for long. You know that, don't you?" The transformation was nearly complete. I could see it, feel it in the air, the darkness crawling across his skin, the monstrous shape slowly overtaking the last piece of humanity that remained. He was still in there, I could tell, but every second was pushing him further away from me. "Please, I can fix this. I can stop it," I said, the words slipping out of my mouth without thinking. My hands were shaking, sweat dripping down my neck, but I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince, Lucas or myself. He laughed, and it wasn't the laugh I remembered. It was hollow, full of pain and emptiness. "You can't fix me, Elias. I'm already gone." I felt something in my chest tighten, like a vice around my heart. My head was spinning. How could this be happening? How had it come to this? Lucas was my brother, my blood, my family. I couldn't just kill him. Could I? But I could see it. The thing he was becoming. It wasn't him anymore. It was something else. Something monstrous. Something unstoppable. If I didn't end this now, I wasn't just losing my brother. I was losing everything. The world would lose everything. And I couldn't live with that. The countdown hit the final 10 seconds. My mind raced as I stood there, frozen in place. The creature that had once been Lucas was shifting, moving with inhuman speed. The last bits of his humanity were fading, slipping into the darkness. I could see it in his eyes. His face was twisted in agony, the conflict inside him impossible to ignore. In it now, Elias. Please. Lucas' voice broke through the chaos for a brief moment. For just a second, I heard my brother. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The choice lay before me like a heavy weight, suffocating me. I had to do it. I reached for my weapon. My fingers brushed against the cold metal. And in that moment, everything went still. The sound of the countdown, the flames, the rubble, all of it disappeared. All I could hear was my own breath. My heart beat louder in my ears, like it was trying to drown out the reality of what I had to do. I raised the gun, my hands trembling as I aimed it at the thing that had once been my brother. I closed my eyes, praying for something, anything, to make this decision easier. But there was nothing. I love you, Lucas, I whispered. It was the only thing I could say before I pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the facility, and in that moment, I felt everything inside me crumble. I had done it. I had killed my brother. But the world wasn't done with me yet. The creature didn't die. It only shifted. And somewhere deep inside, a terrible voice whispered, "This isn't over." The countdown hit 0, and the world exploded into darkness. When I woke up, the air was thick with smoke, and the building had collapsed entirely. I crawled through the wreckage, disoriented, gasping for breath. My body was bruised, battered, but still intact. The worst of it was inside, something that wouldn't leave me, the burden of the choice I had made. I stumbled out of the ruins, unsure whether I was still human, unsure of who I even was anymore. My brother was dead, but something else had survived. And that voice? It was still there. It's never over, Elias. Not until I say it is. The air was still, too still. And somewhere, deep inside, I felt it. The change. I stumbled out of the wreckage, blood seeping from a wound in my side, my breath ragged. The explosion had torn through the facility, leaving nothing but blackened ruins behind. The flames licked at the sky, an angry red contrast against the dark, overcast clouds. I didn't know what time it was anymore, only that the world felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. I should have been dead. I should have been consumed by the fire or torn apart by the blast. But somehow, I made it out. And as the air burned with the scent of charred metal and smoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one who should have been burned alive. I tried to push the thoughts of Lucas, Subject 0, out of my head, but they came flooding back, relentless and sharp. His face, twisted and unfamiliar, yet somehow still carrying traces of the brother I had lost. His words echoed in my ears. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." I gritted my teeth, willing the guilt to go away. I should have ended it, shouldn't I? He begged me to, after all. He begged me to stop him before he became something worse. But I didn't. I couldn't. I'd always been weak when it came to him. Even now, I could hear his voice, hollow and haunting, floating through the back of my mind. It wasn't his voice anymore, though. It was something darker, something that had taken hold of him completely. I pressed a hand against the wound in my side, trying to steady myself. My thoughts were muddled, spinning in every direction. The world didn't feel real. I wasn't sure if I even felt human anymore. The facility behind me was a pile of rubble, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still down there, waiting, watching. Had I really stopped it? Or had I just delayed the inevitable? As I turned to walk away, a faint buzzing noise pulled my attention to the radio strapped to my shoulder. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, the static crackling to life. Elias. The voice was distorted, a garbled mess of broken words. But one part cut through the static like a knife. You should have killed me when you had the chance. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I gripped the radio tighter. That voice, it couldn't be. But it was. It was Lucas. Or whatever was left of him. My stomach twisted, and a chill spread down my spine. He was gone. I had seen him die. I had seen him burn with my own eyes. So why did this feel like a warning? A final taunt from the creature he had become? The radio crackled again, and the voice came through clearer this time, filled with a terrifying calm. You think you're free, Elias? You think you've won? You've only just begun. I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I let go of the radio, dropping it to the dirt. The words were echoing in my skull now, reverberating like an endless drumbeat. Had I really destroyed him? Or had I released something even worse? I took a step back, my feet heavy with the weight of my own uncertainty. What had I done? What had I become? I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to convince myself I had done the right thing. But deep down, I knew that there was no real victory here. No easy answer. The truth had always been buried beneath layers of lies and experiments. And I was one of them, just another cog in the machine that created monsters. The wind picked up, swirling the ashes around me as the flames from the burning facility cast a flickering light across the broken landscape. The night was closing in, and the shadows stretched long and ominous across the cracked earth. I didn't know what I was anymore. The radio lay on the ground, silent now. But I couldn't escape what it had said. You've only just begun. I walked away from the wreckage, my body aching, my mind reeling. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do next. I only knew that the monsters, the ones that had been created in the dark corners of government labs, weren't gone. They never would be. And as I walked, I could swear I felt something watching me, something following me, just out of sight. Maybe it was the monsters, or maybe it was just me.